The grueling journey of a Vietnamese Amerasian's quest to find her father. This is a true story shared by a listener of our program. She is a Vietnamese Amerasian who, after years of searching, finally found her biological father on February 14th, 2023. When she contacted us, she wanted to share her story, not just as a cherished memory, but as a profound milestone in her life. Her journey to find her father was both arduous and deeply moving. Here is her story, as told by Than herself. My birth name is Phan Thi Chi Than, but when I moved to the United States, I simplified it to Phan Than Julie, as middle names aren't commonly used here. I was born in Nha Trang, Can Hoa, in April 1967. From a young age, I always knew I was different. Being biracial, my appearance set me apart from other children. Sadly, I didn't grow up with the love of a mother. Instead, I was raised by my grandmother, extended family, and in boarding schools. The girls my age wouldn't play with me, so most of my friends were boys. I wasn't even allowed to call my mother Mom. Instead, I had to address her as Aunt, to avoid the gossip and judgment that came with having a child with a foreigner. After the fall of Saigon, my mother burned every photo connected to my father. Thankfully, she spared my own pictures. It wasn't until I was preparing to get married that my mother called me into her room and asked me to start addressing her as Mom, instead of Aunt, to avoid embarrassment with my future in-laws. Reflecting on it now, I find the situation painfully ironic. I longed to call someone Dad and to address my paternal grandparents like my younger siblings, my mother's children from her later marriage. But their grandmother made it abundantly clear that I wasn't welcome. "I'm not your grandmother, so don't call me that," she said. Her words felt like a dagger to my heart. That rejection only fueled my burning desire to find my father. From a young age, I was resourceful and independent, learning to fend for myself. Deprived of my mother's affection, I often wondered who my father was. As the years passed, life threw countless challenges my way, but the dream of finding him never dimmed. It only grew stronger. My first opportunity came in 1983 when I was living with my aunt and uncle in Bao Can, Long Tan District, Dong Nai. My mother sent me a letter asking me to return to prepare the paperwork to go to the U.S. I was ecstatic. This was my greatest dream. I was 13 years old at the time. I stepped outside, looked up at the sky, and made a solemn vow to myself. If I ever made it to America, I would do whatever it took to find my father. I returned to Nha Trang to start the paperwork, but after months of waiting, my dreams were shattered when the Amerasian program was abruptly closed. I was devastated, thinking I had lost my one chance. At 18, I got married, and by 19, I had my first daughter. In 1989, the Amerasian program reopened. Words cannot express the joy I felt. My dream of finding my father was alive again. Within 2 months, my application was approved. My husband, child, and I left Vietnam, staying in the Philippines for 6 months before our final move. Before I left, I asked my mother about my father. All she could tell me was his first name, Harry. She wasn't sure of his last name. She thought he might have worked as an aircraft mechanic or worn khaki uniforms. These scant details were all I had to embark on my journey to find him. At that time, it was incredibly precious to me, something I've held close to my heart ever since. When I moved to the Philippines, I started asking questions about how to find my father. An English teacher I met there was eager to help me search for information about his name and occupation. However, the details were too vague, and our efforts proved fruitless. That teacher even visited Vietnam to meet my mother, hoping to uncover more clues, but unfortunately, it led nowhere. I still treasure a childhood album that holds a special place in my heart. My mother once told me that if my father ever saw those photos, he would recognize me instantly. Because of that, I've always taken great care to protect it. Growing up in Vietnam, I never truly felt in control of my own life. It wasn't until I stepped onto the airplane that I told myself, from this moment on, my life is finally my own. After 6 months in the Philippines, my family was sponsored by a church group to relocate to the United States. We settled in a state where I've lived ever since. Once we arrived in America, I sought help from charitable organizations to locate my father, but they declined, citing a lack of clear information. In 1990, I gave birth to a son. At the time, there were very few Vietnamese families in our area, and life was far from easy. Even finding childcare was a major challenge. Despite the difficulties, we never relied on government assistance. Thinking about my children's future and my family back in Vietnam, who also needed support, I decided to leave my job at a factory and transition to the nail industry. That decision changed everything. Thanks to this work, I was able to significantly improve not only my family's life, but also the lives of my relatives in Vietnam. While working, I made the effort to improve my English, not only to better communicate with clients, but also to continue my search for my father. As I built relationships with loyal clients, I began sharing my story with them. Some mentioned that their husbands had also served in Vietnam and tried to help me in my search, but the results were still inconclusive. My mother had told me that my father was an aircraft mechanic and once lived in San Francisco. Some clients offered to investigate further, but there were no records of anyone named Henry in that department between 1965 and 1967. Others mentioned there was indeed a Henry, but he had passed away. Even so, I clung to a fierce hope of finding my father. I promised myself that even if he was no longer alive, I would still find his relatives and ask for a photo, just to know who he was. Time passed. When my eldest daughter got married and became pregnant, she asked me to take a DNA test to check for any hereditary conditions. I agreed and used 23andMe. That experience sparked the idea of doing a DNA test specifically to search for my father, as many people had suggested. In 2017, I registered for a test with Ancestry DNA. Through the test, I discovered many relatives, but there was still no concrete information about my father. That was when I first learned that my last name was actually Javi. In December 2017, the DNA results identified a close match, a man named Harry. I sent him a message but received no response. I reached out to other close relatives listed in the results, but none of them knew anyone named Henry who had served in Vietnam. Time continued to move forward. In early 2023, just before Valentine's Day, a regular client named Susan came into my salon with 2 other people. As they chatted, I learned that Susan had helped many people reconnect with lost family members through DNA testing. My heart leapt with excitement. I knew this was my chance. I approached her and earnestly asked for her help in finding my father. After I finished speaking, I showed her a list of names that matched. She was thrilled to see the strong connection between me and someone named Harry Harvey. Within just a few hours, she began searching for more information. However, she decided to wait until the next day to meet me because I had asked her, "Can you be my Valentine?" So, on Valentine's Day, she arrived with a large sheet of paper. She told me she had traced my lineage, what Americans call a family tree. She discovered that my paternal grandparents had 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. Among the 4 sons, one had recently passed away just 2 weeks earlier. She asked me to look at the remaining 3 men and inquired, "Is one of them named Henry?" I focused, then immediately pointed to a photograph and said with certainty, "That's my father." When I saw his image alongside his daughter, I felt an undeniable connection. I could see myself in them. But his name wasn't Henry. It was Lowell Harry. In that moment, I thought, oh my God, the name my mom gave me doesn't match at all. How could I have spent so many years chasing the wrong lead? Susan had found his Facebook account and sent it to me. That evening, I logged in and started learning more about him. Quietly, I thought, maybe fate is finally on my side. While scrolling through his posts, I discovered that in 2022, he had lost his phone and all his client contacts. He had left a new phone number on his page so people could reach him. Without hesitation, I wrote it down. The next morning, I called Susan to ask whether I should text or call him. She advised me to take things slowly and carefully, ensuring I didn't overwhelm him, as it might lead to rejection. I spent hours contemplating, knowing this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I couldn't afford to miss. At the same time, I was terrified. If the man who had passed away 2 weeks earlier was actually my father, I might have already lost my chance. Finally, I decided to send a message. In the message, I carefully explained that I had taken a DNA test and the results showed I belonged to his family. I asked if he knew of anyone in his family who had served in the Vietnam War because that man would be my biological father. I poured my heart out, hoping he would understand my situation and be willing to help. After sending the message, I waited with bated breath, my anxiety growing with each passing moment. I had no idea how long I might have to wait. Some people like me have waited months for a reply. To my surprise, he responded within 30 minutes. However, his message was cautious. He asked if I was a scammer, noting how common such cases are nowadays. I immediately replied, explaining that I was a long-lost daughter searching for her father. I shared childhood photos of myself and pictures of my mother. He then began verifying my background, asking a friend in law enforcement to check records from when I arrived in the U.S. He asked me where I was born in Vietnam and in what month. Confident in my truth, I answered every question accurately. A few hours later, he messaged me again, confirming that all my information was correct. Then came the words I had been longing to hear. He told me he was my biological father. He was the only son in his family who had served in Vietnam, and he recognized the truth in my story. As we continued to talk and learn more about each other, I uncovered something unexpected. The story my mother had always told me was completely different from the one my father shared. It was as if I was unraveling two sides of a story that didn't quite align, leaving me with even more to reflect on. He had no idea I even existed. He told me that back then, while stationed in France, he volunteered to serve in the Air Force in Vietnam. Upon arriving in Vietnam, he was stationed in Nha Trang, where he met my mother. A few months later, he was transferred to Kontum and was severely injured there. The military evacuated him to Japan for treatment, then to Korea, and eventually back to the United States. From that point on, he never had the chance to return to Vietnam, and he never knew my mother was carrying his child. When I called Vietnam and spoke with my half-sister on my mother's side, I told her I had found our father. She said his story sounded remarkably similar to something our uncle once shared. According to him, when my father was transferred to Kontum in June, my mother discovered she was pregnant. She waited for his return, but he never came back. During that time, my uncle stepped in to care for her until the day she gave birth. The next day, I texted my father to check in. He responded warmly, asking about me and my family. Through our conversations, I learned more about his life, how he had lived alone for the past 20 years, preferring the solitude of the mountains over the noise of city life. There, he worked on leather crafts, making saddles, gun holsters, and other items. He also took on custom orders when requested. He loved hunting and horseback riding, and his lifestyle reflected his independent and unique character. At first, I asked if I could visit him, but he seemed hesitant about his living situation. He told me to take my time, explaining that he was currently busy. Still, I made it a point to stay in touch, checking in with him regularly. Over time, I felt he started to soften. For his birthday on August 25th, I asked again if I could visit and celebrate with him. To my surprise and delight, he agreed. On August 26th, 2023, a Saturday, I met my father in person for the very first time. Words cannot describe the emotions of that moment. We embraced tightly, holding on for what felt like an eternity. My father apologized over and over for not knowing about me. From then on, everything fell into place. I even met his family and his other daughter. They were all incredibly welcoming and kind, making me feel like I truly belonged. That day, my son, who is serving in the military, made a 3-hour trip to meet his grandfather. It was such a special moment, made even more extraordinary by a remarkable coincidence. His grandchild and my grandchild were born on the exact same day, month, and year. Finally, my dream had come true. I had met my father, a real, living person. No words could fully capture the happiness I felt. In that moment, I realized just how lucky I was. My father didn't reject me. On the contrary, he welcomed me with open arms and joy, embracing the daughter he never knew he had. And that is the emotional journey of how I reconnected with my father after so many years apart. What do you think of this story? Have you ever experienced something similar or have your own touching story to share? If so, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more stories like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.